Well, let's step into what's called a block on board. It's called a bob die. And with a bob die, what happens is everything that is on the AccuQuilt die is on one board, and the units that are in this are all together. Now, on the bob die for this one is called the Lemoyne Star. And the Lemoyne Star has just three elements on it. It has the parallelogram, it has a large triangle, and a small triangle. And so on this one in particular, all I did was we put on um, the fabrics that we have and we mashed them together. We basically went ahead and cut them in a stack, and then they share the units there. So each quarter of this is made up out of 6 units. It's a parallelogram, a large half square and a small half square, and then it's a mirror of that image. And so when we build this block, the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to be laying this out next to us so we can see where all the units go. Now, as we sew this, we're only going to be looking at the block 1/8 at a time. Then that one section is a mirror image of that. When you use the Lemoyne Star die, you're going to be having it so that it's right sides up. As you're separating out your fabrics, then what you want to do is you want to look to make sure, especially that white on white is the printed side face up. And my recommendation is that you lay it out as shown. Now, there are options to this where you can move them around, where you can have, in each quadrant, you could put all the red pieces with it. You could put all the black pieces in the other one. This is how I chose to put it, but you do have some options here. So we're going to head over to the sewing machine, and I've got on my sewing machine a 1/4 inch presser foot. I have a single hole stitch plate in my machine, and then I've got my blocks that I've picked up a section at a time. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be walking all these in and as if they're enders and leaders for other parts of the block. And the first piece, and again, I like this Annie's Tailor's Awl because it has little teeth that are diamond-like teeth along um, the the spindle of the spiky part, and so it helps me to be able to massage those pieces under the needle. My favorite seam ripper is a Clover seam ripper. Frankly, it's one of the least expensive ones, but I can seam rip with this thing even on the finest of fabrics, and it doesn't distort things, and it has a really great knife on the inside of it. It's finer than any other seam rippers that are out there. My next one is my Ginger clips. I love the Ginger clips to be able to clip the thread in between or get really close to things. The Ginger clips are also sharp enough to be able to get some of those dog ears off if I need to. I use my Ginger clips a lot of times even as a seam ripper in a hurry because it's really close by. It's not my first seam ripper of choice, but it can do the job. And so these 4 tools I have a container next to on top of my sewing machine, and that's where I keep these pieces. My favorite tool of the 4 is called the point-to-point turner. This is a combination of a Hera tool and a point turner, but I love it because the company that designed it brought it back to plastic. For a while they were making parts of this in bamboo, which is okay, except that the bamboo would lose its varnish and it wasn't nearly as smooth as the plastic is. I love the shape of this. It's a really great tool. It's what I use for flattening out those seams. And so with these tools, it's important that I keep them nearby. Now, I would recommend that you invest in a second set of these and put them in your travel case, especially for those of you that go and sew at friends' house or at retreats. It's better off to grab that travel case and not have to remember to go get your seam ripper and go get your point-to-point turner. That's when I tend to forget things. A tip to really helping with your memory is set yourself up for success. Don't try to remember things that you can set up without having to think about what's there. And that's what I do as far as traveling's in there. Now, as you look at that parallelogram underneath the needle, you can see how that little half square triangle fits perfectly and snugly in that space. You can see where that blunted off edge really finishes that piece out and makes it work really, really well. So I'm going to be going into my machine with my 1/4 inch, and I'm going to have my tools nearby so that I can start sewing these pieces. Now, when I've talked to you about enders and leaders before, for this one, I can bring in enders and leaders from my other project, my border project that I did. However, I'm going to choose this time to use the different elements of this block because there's a fair amount of piecing in it. And I'm going to just keep rolling those through my sewing machine and still working on focusing on the block one quadrant at a time. And so you're going to put together the 3 units, and then you're going to put together 3 units of the other one, and then you're going to be sewing that diagonal seam. And so when I look at this as far as running in the machine, if you notice, when I put that up against there, because I'm working with AccuQuilt, that point that informs where my 1/4 inch is incredibly clear. You can see it right in place there, and it's with those magic notches that are in the block. Now I can send the fabric through what I think is the bigger side up or the other side. You mainly want to be able to see everything that you can get to. Now, I line this up with my 1/4 inch, and lining things up with a 1/4 inch is really important to be looking ahead, because a lot of times what people will do, because of the way you run things in, they'll have it a little bit tipped at an angle. That's when you usually get like 2 or 3 stitches at the beginning or in the middle where they are over to one side or the other, and that can distort your seam. So you want to make sure things are lined up so that you can go directly into the machine. Now I'm lining up my next piece nearby my needle, and I'm going to flip that other piece down there, and I just picked this up from over there on my left hand side, and now I'm going to be adding in that large half square triangle. But I notice when I do this, it's going to be kind of klutzy because it's going to go in that way. So I'm going to flip the block over so it nudges right inside of there for the piecing. So I'm doing chain piecing, and I'm sending my next unit in at the same time. And as I walk that into the machine, I can go back and I can pick off my first unit and do my pressing. Now, in this case, I've got another white on white fabric, one of those holiday white on white fabrics. Is beautiful, and I'm going to be using that as my background. But what I want to do is I would like to, if possible, I would like to press away from the white on white. That's not always possible, and on the first elements that you try it out one way. If you don't like the way it's going, you can always turn that seam around and restitch it. So as I turn this over, what I want to do is I want to use that point-to-point turner, which is frankly the very best seam presser that I have ever worked with. And I love it so much, I have one of these by 2 of my machines, and I have one in my travel case. Now I'm going to add on that other half square triangle. Look at how beautifully that thing fits in there. So I could go in and I could sew it again upside down, but notice it's going to run into that other parallelogram. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it up so that I have less interruption running into that next piece when I chain piece it in there. So underneath my needle currently is the second half of that one quadrant, and this is the last half of that quadrant. So I'm working through these blocks, and so this is that upper left hand side of the block that I'm piecing in there. Both are underneath the needle. Most of the pieces are picked up and they're being stitched together. One has 1 unit stitched to it and one has 2 units stitched to it. And my goal is to put all 3 units together. So now I'm going to come in here. I'm going to add my last piece. I'm going to press it before I add that last piece. And when I say press it, I mean with the point-to-point turner. And the point-to-point turner, I'm going to using the pressing end of that tool. I love also how that tool fits in my hand. It's the right shape and it just fits beautifully. So now I'm going to swing this around and I'm going to put my large triangle on there. Now, that really long bias that goes alongside of the parallelogram and the half square triangle is a bias that is it's a bias edge that could stretch. I'm not worried about it because I'm going to be taking it in and putting it together with my other unit. So I'm taking that first unit out and I've sewn it together, and I've gone ahead and put the other big half square triangle onto that. So I now have all the elements sewn together for 1/8 plus 1/8. I'm going to go and pick up one of the units from the next quadrant over to the upper right, and I'm going to start sewing that while I still have the first 2 segments from that upper left-hand quadrant in the machine. When you work this way, using my Annie's Tailor's awl to get that right underneath that needle, I'm always watching where my 1/4 inch seam is, that it's right along the side there. I choose to use a 37 or a 97 foot is my favorite on this particular machine. We can look into 1/4 inch feet for your machine, and we'd be happy to help you with that. Now, if you notice on this one, I'm experimenting what would happen if I press that all towards the dark or towards the light. So I do that experimenting while I'm doing this. I don't sit down and try to make a decision and say that's what I'm going to do through all the blocks. I'm going to do a few blocks and do it this way. The Lemoyne Star is one of my favorite AccuQuilt bob dies, block on board dies. The tricky thing about it sometimes is that it is directional. So you do have to have either all your fabric cut facing up or facing down, because otherwise your stars will turn and go the other way. Now, I will tell you, I'm working on a quilt presently with the Lemoyne Star, and I had 12 or 9 blocks, and I was going to just stop because I had 3 other blocks going the other way, and I was going to make a table runner out of that. Well, I pieced these a couple of years ago, and I'm mature enough now that I've decided I'm just putting those 3 back in there, and I'm going to get over it. The only one that's really going to know they're turning a different direction, or quote, the wrong direction, is me, and I'm over it. Plus, it'll make the quilt a little bit longer for my grandson. He'll appreciate that a lot. So it's going to be literally 12 inches longer. Well, my ego can take that he is going to have a quilt that's 12 inches longer, right? And I could unsew it, but I really can't unsew it because I cut the blocks that way. Don't beat yourself up over these mistakes. What you see as a mistake is actually a design opportunity many times. So I've got that first quadrant coming out of the machine. This is when I do a happy dance. I don't care if you do it while you're sitting in your chair or you have to stand up, but you look at how that sits together. Look at how beautiful that block is. Now, this is a tomato thing. It doesn't matter which way you press that diagonal seam because it's going to offend one piece or the other if it's going towards the dark on this one and the light on that one. Remember, this is why you have batting in quilts. It soaks up those seams. And that's really a beautiful feature of quilting. Now I'm moving on to the other section in that top quadrant. Okay, working through a little bit more using all of my tools in place. And on this one, if I was using my seam ripper and I made a mistake on something, I actually stop and seam rip it as I go along. I'm sending through the rest of the pieces as they go along. Then what I like to do is I like to put my work back off to my left-hand side so I keep track of where I'm at. If I'm going to be only sewing for an hour or so and I can get one block done, I don't typically start a second block if I can't get it done in that amount of time. It is kind of hard to pick this up later on. It's easier to do it all at one time. Once you would get going on a groove of many of these, which is easy to do, you will start getting a system to put things into place. Now in this one in particular, you have that white on white that sometimes can be difficult to discern which direction is up and which direction is down. Once you start stacking them up, a lot of them, you're going to notice that the points, especially on the parallelograms and the half square triangles, have tipping points, have edges that are notched going the same way. When I say notched, they're not notched like a garment, they're angled so that they fit together beautifully. This is a brilliant single die to work with. There's so many color options you can do with it. I've seen it with yellow for the background and all shades of blue for the elements. I've seen it with Christmas fabric. I've seen it with just red and white. The Lemoyne Star oftentimes and the Hunter Star often show up as 2 color ones. My favorite way to do this is I've seen it with navy and K-facet fabric for the elements. So everything you see in there that's white is navy, and then everything else they put it together with K. Now I'm sneaking in a little bit closer so you can see where that stitch line is. And so you can see as it's coming through, that's where my 1/4 inch is. That's where it's lining up. And so as I send it into the machine, what I'm doing is I want to get in there and I want to use the accurate 1/4 inch. Now watch what happens here when you send that triangle set through. we actually have a point that shows where the 1/4 inch starts. And if you notice down at the bottom, there is an intersection where that 1/4 inch ends. That is another feature that I love about the AccuQuilt dies. Now, in the publication that you were given, it shows how to traditionally cut a Lemoyne star. I still would really much rather do it this way. Now, if you notice, half of my block is done, and I've set it over there, and now I'm going to finish up the other half of this block. And I'm getting more comfortable and confident with sending through chain piecing, even after doing just one block. If you do 12 of these, it's going to be second nature. I will say also, it's something we've featured in Mystery Monday before, we've used block on board dies like the Lemoyne Star and the Hunter Star and dies like that. We have used them as borders for around panels. It is a beautiful, beautiful element with those beautiful, spiky pieces in that to be able to work together. Now, I was asked earlier, what about that star shape that's on there that you see? Is that parallelogram like what you see in a radiant star? Yes, it is. Can you cut them up with this? Absolutely. So this can be made into even a larger piece by using just that parallelogram. Now this block in particular is a 9-inch block, a 9-inch finished. When AccuQuilt makes a block like the Lemoyne Star or the Hunter Star, they only make it in one size. They do not alter it for making it with all sizes. Customers get real sensitive about that. They don't want to keep having to buy other pieces. Now if you notice, I sent through a little unit that was a border unit that was just square and point, and that was so that I could separate this down and continue to work on my one block. So I was using that as an ender so that I can go in and I can release the piece that I need and free myself up to move to the next thing. Now notice when I do that, when I send something through that's not part of my die, I still take the time to work on that with my point-to-point turner and boss those seams the direction that I want them to be, because I don't like coming back later on and trying to fix those things. So here we go, we're building another quadrant out. We come off on that beautiful 1/4 inch ending. I love the way that comes out. I just love it when something comes out even and square. Now, this other little piece that I'm sending you is a tiny little square on point. The other thing I like about using these smaller things like this for enders and leaders is I find that I take my time to do them well and correctly. Plus, it's incredibly rewarding to go and make another block and realize that I have maybe 10 or 15 of them done from being enders and leaders. There, we're getting a square on point. Look at how beautifully that fits in there. I love the feature of how those corners fit in and how AccuQuilt has engineered those. Now I have the other half of my Lemoyne Star ready to go together. I'm putting it right sides together, and I'm going to take my time and I'm going to walk it through the underneath the stitch, and then I'm going to be able to bring it back and finish it out, and I'm going to be able to open it up. Now, before I go any further, I am taking the point-to-point turner to that center. Please do not twist that seam on the center to get it to lay flatter. Again, when we get to the point where we're ready to put this together with other pieces, that is when we will start talking about pressing. We might not press then, but that's when we're going to start talking about it. So I can show you some tips. Don't get wigged out that that middle is really high. It has a lot of bulk in it, but that bulk is also preventing the middle of your stars from having holes on them. How do we know that? When you look at a lot of antique quilts, you see holes in the middle of stars because people have graded the seams so much that you don't have anything for the threads and fibers to hang on to. So let's look at some other versions of the Lemoyne Star. It's one of my favorites, and there are so many beautiful things you can do with this shape. This is the Lemoyne Star, pairing it together with a large version and a small version. Those are actually built together into segments that are the squares, and then they create that asymmetrical piece to them. You can also add other strips in between. But if you want something tightly symmetrical, here's a Lemoyne Star with Ohio stars in the corners. Isn't that beautiful? And those Ohio stars are probably made out of a 4-inch or a 6-inch cube. So either 3/4 the size of the 9-inch or half the size of the 9-inch, or a little bit more than half the size of the 9-inch. And all that's done is they built it into the borders. This is a scrappy Lemoyne star. I think this is a really terrific classic use of the Lemoyne star, and it's one that has some real popularity to it. That's got a combination of everything from 30s through tulip pink fabric, for crying out loud. I mean, brilliant stuff happening there. Now, traditionally, you see a lot of Lemoyne stars as a two-color quilt. And this one in particular, you can see there are seams in those parallelograms. That is not what you're going to get when you work with the AccuQuilt die system and you work with the block on board. Those parallelograms end up turning into one whole piece. This is a favorite of mine that is just a real beauty to have and to see how they've worked together, a whole wide array of colors. You'll notice that they have something that looks kind of like a dark light background, but this is actually just a wide mixture of different colors and patterns. Now here's a Lemoyne star that is surrounded by quarter square triangles to make a sashing for the whole quilt. And so the quilt is covered with Lemoyne stars, but they're finished out with sashings in quarter square triangles to fit around them. Very unique. A really simple application is doing kind of a light dark, a negative positive image of this, and this brings together grays, charcoal, oranges, pumpkin color, cream, white, gray, almost a Halloween effect to it, but a very interesting interpretation of the Lemoyne star. This one is a scrappy one, and so if you notice, each of the blocks is designed almost so that it purely has just two fabrics in it. However, you can see possibly, and this is important for you to look at because this happens in your sewing room, but occasionally we run out of fabric. And look at what's happened here. The designer went ahead and just stitched it in. Done is better than done perfect. This is a beautiful combining of the Lemoyne star with the snail's trail. And so all it is it's an alternating between snail's trail, Lemoyne star, snail's trail, Lemoyne star, snail's trail. And the next row is the flip of it. Plus, they put half square triangles in the border as a point. So this is the building of the Lemoyne star, a very simple element that looks really elegant and looks very, very sophisticated. And it's really rewarding to sew. And I love it. I mean, we can do it, piecing it traditionally. You have that in the magazine. But the real secret and beauty to piecing this well and right is to be using that block on board die to get it pieced in there. Well, I hope we've given you more ideas to help you be inspired to sew more and more and to enjoy this beautiful block. It is so satisfying, so gratifying to see something come together with all those seams together in the center and really make it a glorious thing. You have got some really serious, amazing quilting skills. I love how open you've been to learn, and I look forward to inspiring you to sew more and more.